In a courtroom filled with tension, one brave black woman stood up to a racist judge, and what happened next shocked everyone. Asha Williams, a smart and determined lawyer, was about to face Judge Leonard Hartman, a man known for his unfair treatment of minorities. But this time, things wouldn't go his way. You won't believe the clever plan Asha had to turn the situation around. Before we jump into this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like and share if you love hearing stories about courage and justice. This isn't just a story about a legal battle. It's a story about standing up for what's right. Stay with us to see how Asha's actions shook the courtroom and changed everything. Asha Williams was a determined and fearless young lawyer. She had grown up witnessing the unfair treatment her community often faced in the justice system, which inspired her to become an advocate for the voiceless. Known for her sharp intellect and calm demeanor, Asha had taken on cases that others deemed unwinnable. This time, she was defending a young man falsely accused of stealing from a wealthy store owner, a case that had already stirred tensions in the community. On the other side stood Judge Leonard Hartman, a man infamous for his biased rulings and condescending attitude. He had been on the bench for decades, and many whispered about his history of dismissing minority defendants and lawyers without giving them a fair chance. To him, Asha was just another lawyer trying to challenge his authority, something he took as a personal insult. The courtroom was full, with a crowd of community members, legal observers, and reporters. The tension was thick as Asha prepared to defend her client. She was well aware of the challenges ahead. This wasn't just a case. It was a battle against a system that had failed people like her client for far too long. From the start, the judge made his stance clear. He cut Asha off mid-sentence, rolled his eyes at her arguments, and mocked her evidence. "Do you really think this holds any weight in my courtroom?" he sneered as Asha calmly presented her case. His words were sharp, his tone dismissive, and his behavior unmistakably aimed at undermining her. But Asha wasn't intimidated. She had come prepared, and she knew how to handle someone like Judge Hartman. She spoke with confidence, carefully presenting her arguments and refusing to rise to his provocations. Each time he tried to belittle her, she responded with facts, keeping her composure and staying one step ahead. What no one in the room realized was that Asha had done her homework, not just on the case, but on the judge himself. She had discovered something in his past, something that could shake the very foundation of his authority. Asha had uncovered proof of his involvement in a case years ago where he had blatantly ignored key evidence, leading to a wrongful conviction. This wasn't just about defending her client. It was about exposing a larger pattern of injustice. As the hearing progressed, the judge's condescension grew. He dismissed witness testimonies and refused to consider Asha's requests for additional evidence. The tension in the room escalated, with whispers spreading among the audience. Yet Asha remained focused, biding her time until the right moment to reveal what she had. By the end of the session, it was clear that the judge underestimated her. While he believed he was in control, Asha was quietly setting the stage for revelation that would turn the courtroom and the judge's career upside down. Little did Judge Hartman know, the next step in Asha's plan was about to begin, and it would leave him speechless. The hearing started, and it didn't take long for Judge Leonard Hartman's prejudice to become evident. Asha Williams began with a clear, powerful opening statement, explaining how her client, Marcus Walker, had been falsely accused of theft. She presented a timeline and video footage proving Marcus wasn't even near the store at the time of the alleged crime. The audience listened closely, But Judge Hartman's reaction was immediate and dismissive. "Counselor Williams," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin, "you are painting a nice story, but this courtroom runs on evidence, not imagination." Asha, maintaining her composure, responded calmly, "Your Honor, I am confident the evidence will speak for itself as the case progresses." But Judge Hartman wasn't interested in listening. He interrupted her frequently, cutting her off mid-sentence and rolling his eyes as she spoke. His tone was condescending, his words sharp and aimed at belittling Asha. "I hope you don't think you can win this case with such flimsy arguments," he sneered, his voice loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Despite the judge's obvious bias, Asha remained steady. She knew this wasn't just about proving Marcus's innocence. It was about standing up to a system that had failed too many people like him. She carefully presented her arguments, each point backed by solid evidence. But Judge Hartman found ways to dismiss or ignore them. For example, when Asha introduced a key witness, a local store clerk who saw someone else near the store during the time of the alleged theft, the judge waved it off. "This so-called witness doesn't seem reliable," he said. "Bring me something concrete, Counselor Williams." The tension in the room grew thicker with each passing minute. Asha's supporters in the audience, many of whom were from Marcus's neighborhood, sat silently but exchanged nervous glances. They could feel the unfairness in the air. Meanwhile, reporters in the back scribbled furiously, clearly sensing that this case was more than just another trial. It was a clash between justice and bias. Marcus, sitting beside Asha, looked anxious. He'd been through so much already, arrested and treated like a criminal despite his innocence. Judge Hartman's comments only added to his fears. At one point, the judge addressed Marcus directly, his tone cold and accusing. "Mr. Walker," he said, narrowing his eyes, "your record speaks volumes. Are you sure you're not just lucky this time?" Asha quickly interjected, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, my client has no criminal record. That statement is unfounded and irrelevant to this case." Judge Hartman glared at her. "I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom, Counselor Williams." The audience could feel the tension building. Asha, however, refused to back down. She knew that arguing with the judge directly would only harm her case, so she stayed focused, letting his bias become more evident with every comment he made. What no one knew was that Asha had come prepared for this very scenario. She had done her research, and she had discovered something that would change everything. As the hearing progressed, Asha began subtly laying the groundwork for her next move. She introduced evidence that connected the store owner to a history of false accusations, but Judge Hartman dismissed it outright. "This is irrelevant to the current case," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Asha didn't argue. Instead, she calmly said, "Noted, Your Honor," and moved on. She was waiting for the right moment to strike. By the end of the session, it was clear that the judge was doing everything in his power to undermine Asha's case. He granted the prosecution extra time to present their arguments, while rushing Asha through hers. The crowd murmured in frustration, but Asha's expression remained unreadable. She was playing the long game. Just as Judge Hartman was about to adjourn for the day, Asha spoke up. "Your Honor, before we conclude, I would like to file a motion to enter additional evidence into the record." The judge sighed dramatically, clearly annoyed. "Counselor Williams, this court has heard enough for today. What could possibly justify delaying this further?" Asha stepped forward, her voice steady and calm. "This evidence is directly related to the integrity of this courtroom, Your Honor. It is essential to ensuring a fair trial." The room fell silent. The audience, reporters, and even the prosecution leaned in, sensing that something big was about to happen. Judge Hartman looked suspicious, but allowed her to continue. "Very well," he said grudgingly. Proceed, but keep it brief. Asha walked to the evidence table and placed a sealed file before the judge. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared. What no one realized was that this evidence wasn't just about the case. It was about the judge himself. Asha had discovered proof of corruption and bias in Judge Hartman's past rulings, including cases where he had deliberately ignored critical evidence to convict innocent people. This evidence, Asha said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom, is a series of records and transcripts that raise serious concerns about impartiality in this courtroom. It directly impacts my client's right to a fair trial. The judge's face froze, and for the first time he looked genuinely unsettled. The crowd was stunned, their murmurs growing louder. Asha had set the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. What happened next would shock the courtroom and expose the truth about Judge Hartman. The courtroom was silent as Asha Williams stood tall before Judge Leonard Hartman, her sealed file of evidence resting on the table. All eyes were on her. She had spent the last few days carefully preparing for this moment, knowing it would be the most pivotal battle of her career. Your Honor, Asha began, her voice calm but firm. What I am about to present is not just evidence for this case, but information that directly questions the fairness of this courtroom. Judge Hartman's face hardened, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Counselor Williams, you're walking a fine line here. I suggest you tread carefully. Asha didn't flinch. She calmly opened the file and began pulling out documents. These are records from cases presided over by Your Honor in the last 10 years, she said. They show a troubling pattern of rulings that disproportionately affect defendants from minority backgrounds, including cases where key evidence was ignored or improperly dismissed. The crowd gasped, and the whispers grew louder. Reporters scribbled furiously, and a few reached for their phones to record the unfolding drama. Judge Hartman's face turned red, and he banged his gavel sharply. Order! I will not have this courtroom turned into a spectacle. Your Honor, Asha said, holding her ground, this is not a spectacle. This is about justice. The integrity of this courtroom is at stake, and as an officer of the court, it is my duty to bring this to light. The judge leaned forward, his voice rising. Counselor Williams, this is a baseless attack on my character. If you think you can intimidate this court with accusations, you are sorely mistaken. Asha held up a specific document. This case from 2017, Your Honor, she said, her tone unwavering, involved a young man wrongfully convicted of theft. Evidence proving his innocence was submitted, but dismissed without cause. That evidence was later found to be credible, but by then the damage was done. That young man spent 2 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The judge's expression faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. That case has nothing to do with the matter at hand, he said, his voice tightening. But it does, Your Honor, Asha countered, her voice growing stronger. It demonstrates a pattern, one that raises serious questions about impartiality. And it doesn't stop there. She pulled out another document. Here is another case where similar irregularities occurred. And another. Your Honor, this is not an isolated incident. The courtroom was buzzing now. Even the prosecution looked uneasy. Judge Hartman gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. This is highly improper, he growled. I will not allow you to hijack this trial with baseless allegations. These are not baseless, Asha said, raising her voice just enough to be heard over the tension in the room. In fact, I have obtained audio recordings from court proceedings where Your Honor made racially insensitive remarks. These recordings have already been verified and submitted to the relevant authorities. The room exploded into gasps and murmurs. The reporters began typing furiously, and the audience looked shocked. Judge Hartman's face turned pale, and he banged his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order. "This is outrageous," he roared. "I will not tolerate these lies in my courtroom." Asha remained composed, locking eyes with him. "Your Honor, these are not lies. The recordings, the case files, and the statistical analysis all point to the same conclusion, that bias has played a significant role in your rulings, and if this court cannot be impartial, then my client cannot receive a fair trial." The judge stood, his voice trembling with rage. "You have no right to question this court's integrity." "And yet, Your Honor," Asha said, her voice steady, "the evidence speaks for itself. I am not questioning your authority. I am presenting facts, facts that demand accountability." The tension in the room was unbearable. Everyone watched as Judge Hartman stared at Asha, his face a mix of anger and panic. For a moment it seemed like he might shout her down again, but then something shifted. He sat back in his chair, his shoulders slumping slightly. Asha seized the moment. "Your Honor, this is not about you or me. This is about justice. And justice cannot be served in a courtroom where fairness is compromised." Judge Hartman didn't respond. The room was silent except for the faint scratching of reporters' pens. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "This court will take a recess to review the evidence." As he stood and left the courtroom, the tension broke, and the audience erupted into murmurs. Asha returned to her seat, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline coursed through her. Marcus looked at her, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "Do you think this will work?" he whispered. "It already has," Asha said quietly. "The truth is out now." As the crowd began filing out of the courtroom, reporters surrounded Asha, firing off questions about the evidence and her bold confrontation. She answered calmly, but kept her focus on the larger issue. "This is not about me," she said. "This is about ensuring that everyone, no matter their background, gets a fair trial." Outside the courtroom, the news of the evidence spread rapidly. Social media lit up with clips of the confrontation, and the public demanded an investigation into Judge Hartman's rulings. Back inside, the courtroom waited for what would come next. The judge's reaction and the court's decision would determine not only the outcome of Marcus's trial, but also the future of justice in that courtroom. The courtroom remained tense after the recess was announced. Whispers filled the air as reporters debated the next move, and supporters exchanged hopeful glances. Outside, the news of Asha Williams' bold confrontation with Judge Leonard Hartman spread like wildfire. Social media platforms buzzed with clips of the trial, and hashtags calling for justice began trending. As everyone filed back into the courtroom, the mood was different. There was a sense of anticipation, as though everyone could feel something monumental was about to happen. Judge Hartman returned to his seat, his face visibly strained. He avoided eye contact with Asha, who sat confidently at the defense table, her client Marcus Walker beside her. "Before we proceed," the judge said, his voice tight, "I want to remind everyone that this is a courtroom, not a media circus. I will not have my authority undermined." But his words lacked the force they once had. The evidence Asha had presented earlier had clearly shaken him, and the murmurs in the gallery hinted that people were no longer afraid to question him. Asha stood. "Your Honor, if I may, I would like to submit one final piece of evidence." Judge Hartman stiffened. "More evidence, Counselor Williams. Haven't you done enough grandstanding for one day?" Asha remained calm. "This is not grandstanding, Your Honor. This is the truth, and the truth deserves to be heard." The courtroom fell silent as Asha handed a USB drive to the bailiff, who inserted it into the court's projector system. The screen lit up, showing a grainy recording from a courtroom session 5 years earlier. It was a case presided over by Judge Hartman. In the recording, he could be heard making offhand comments about the defendant, a young black man, that were clearly biased and inappropriate. "He's just another thug trying to beat the system," Hartman's voice said in the recording. Gasps filled the room. The video continued, showing how the judge dismissed key evidence without proper review and pressured the jury toward a guilty verdict. Judge Hartman's face turned ashen. "This is highly improper," he barked, slamming his gavel. "I demand that this recording be dismissed immediately." But Asha was ready. "Your Honor, this recording was obtained through official court transcripts and public records. It is admissible as evidence, and it speaks to the larger issue of fairness in this courtroom." The audience buzzed with shock. Reporters scrambled to take notes, and some began live-streaming the moment. The prosecution looked uneasy, clearly trying to distance themselves from the judge. Asha continued, her voice steady and clear. "This recording is not an isolated incident. It reflects a pattern of behavior that has resulted in numerous wrongful convictions. My client, Marcus Walker, is yet another victim of this system, and it is my duty to ensure he does not suffer the same fate." Judge Hartman leaned forward, gripping the edge of his desk. "Counselor Williams, you are out of line." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Asha replied, her voice unwavering, "this court is out of line if it allows injustice to continue unchecked." The judge opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of the courtroom doors opening. A group of legal officials entered, led by a senior representative from the State Judicial Review Board. The room fell into stunned silence as the group approached the judge's bench. "Judge Hartman," the representative said, his voice firm, "we have been reviewing the evidence submitted by Counselor Williams, and it raises serious questions about your conduct. Effective immediately, we are suspending you from this case pending a full investigation." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and even cheers filled the air as people realized the gravity of what had just happened. Judge Hartman looked completely stunned, his authority stripped away in an instant. The senior official turned to Asha. "Counselor Williams, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Justice must be fair for all, and we will ensure this case is reviewed properly." Asha nodded, her heart pounding, but her face calm. She turned to Marcus, who sat frozen in shock. "It's over," she said softly. "They can't hurt you anymore." The gallery erupted into applause. Supporters of Marcus cheered while others wept with relief. Reporters crowded around Asha as she left the courtroom, shouting questions about how she managed to gather the evidence and what this meant for the justice system. Outside, the news spread rapidly. The community rallied behind Asha, praising her bravery and determination. Meanwhile, Judge Hartman faced intense public backlash as more of his past rulings were called into question. His reputation crumbled overnight. But the moment wasn't just about him. It was about Marcus, who was finally cleared of all charges. It was about the many others who had been wrongfully convicted under Hartman's rulings. And it was about Asha, who had proven that one person's courage could bring about real change. The twist left the world stunned, and the courtroom battle became a symbol of hope and justice for people everywhere. The courtroom had become a symbol of hope after the suspension of Judge Leonard Hartman. As the Judicial Review Board took over the proceedings, a new judge was appointed to oversee the case. This judge, known for impartiality and integrity, quickly ruled that the evidence against Marcus Walker was insufficient. The charges were dropped, and Marcus was declared innocent. As the gavel struck, Signaling the end of the trial, the gallery erupted in applause. Marcus, stunned and overwhelmed, turned to Asha Williams. Tears welled up in his eyes as he whispered, "Thank you. You saved my life." Asha smiled warmly. "You deserved justice, Marcus. That's all I wanted." The emotional moment didn't stop there. Community members who had filled the courtroom in support of Marcus began cheering and chanting his name. They held signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Truth always wins." The joy was palpable, and it was clear that this wasn't just a victory for Marcus. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt silenced by a biased system. Meanwhile, the fallout for Judge Hartman was swift and severe. The Judicial Review Board announced an official investigation into his rulings over the past 2 decades. Media outlets published exposés detailing cases where his bias had likely led to wrongful convictions. Former defendants came forward, sharing their stories of injustice under his authority. Hartman issued a brief statement denying the allegations, but it was too late. The evidence presented by Asha had ignited a movement. Petitions called for systemic reforms in the judiciary, and protests demanding accountability spread across the state. For Hartman, the consequences were personal as well as professional. He was forced to step down from his position, and his reputation, once untouchable, was permanently tarnished. It became clear that he had abused his power for far too long, and the system he once controlled was now holding him accountable. A few days after the trial, Asha returned to her office. The phone had been ringing non-stop with messages of support and gratitude. She received calls from civil rights organizations, lawyers, and everyday people who saw her as a symbol of courage and resilience. Sitting at her desk, Asha reflected on the journey. The fight had been long and difficult, and there were moments when she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. But through it all, she had stayed true to her mission, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Her thoughts drifted to her father, a civil rights activist who had faced his own battles against injustice. He had always told her, "The fight for justice is never easy, but it's always worth it." Asha smiled, feeling his presence with her. She knew he would be proud. The victory had a ripple effect on the community. Marcus became a symbol of resilience, and his story inspired others to speak out against injustice. Local organizations began offering legal support to those who couldn't afford it, ensuring that no one would have to face the system alone. The case also sparked larger conversations about judicial reform. Lawmakers introduced new policies aimed at increasing transparency in the court system. Judges across the state were required to undergo bias training, and a special committee was formed to review past cases where bias may have played a role. For Asha, this was the most rewarding part of the journey. It wasn't just about winning a single case. It was about creating lasting change. She knew there was still a long way to go, but this victory was a step in the right direction. A week after the trial, the community gathered for a celebration in the park. People of all ages came together, sharing food, music, and stories. Marcus stood on a small stage, addressing the crowd with a shaky but heartfelt voice. "I thought my life was over," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "But Asha Williams believed in me when no one else would. She fought for me, and because of her, I'm standing here today." The crowd erupted into applause, and Asha, standing off to the side, felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't done it for recognition, but hearing Marcus's gratitude reminded her why she had chosen this path. As the celebration continued, people came up to Asha to thank her personally. One woman, holding her young daughter's hand, said, You've shown us that no matter how big the system seems, one person can make a difference. You've given us hope. The events surrounding the trial and Judge Hartman's exposure carried a powerful lesson. Justice is not automatic. It requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to challenge those in power. Asha's journey showed that standing up to injustice, no matter how intimidating the opponent, can lead to real change. It also highlighted the importance of community. Asha hadn't fought alone. She was supported by people who believed in her, and her victory was as much theirs as it was hers. Together, they had shown that unity could break down even the most entrenched barriers. As the celebration wound down, Asha looked out at the crowd. She felt a sense of peace, knowing she had made a difference. But she also knew her work wasn't finished. There were still battles to fight, still people who needed her help. Walking away from the stage, Asha thought about the future. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she was ready to face them. Because for her, the fight for justice was more than a job. It was her life's calling. As the sun set over the courthouse, Asha Williams stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by supporters, reporters, and a sea of smiling faces. The victory was more than just a legal win. It was a moment of change, a spark that lit a fire in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed her courage. Asha turned to the crowd, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This fight wasn't just about Marcus Walker or even about me," she said. "It was about all of us. It was about standing up to injustice, no matter how impossible it might seem. Today, we proved that truth and courage can prevail." The crowd erupted into applause, many holding up signs reading "Justice for All" and "Truth Wins." Asha looked at Marcus, who stood beside her, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. He gave her a small nod, a silent thank you for giving him his life back. As the crowd began to disperse, Asha turned to the camera crews filming the moment. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice resolute. "There are still battles to be fought and changes to be made. But we've shown that when we come together, we can make a difference." Turning directly to the audience watching at home, Asha smiled. "What do you think about this case? Do you believe one person can change a broken system? Let me know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage and justice." She paused, her expression softening. "Thank you for standing with us. Together we can continue to fight for a better, fairer world. I'll see you in the next story." As she stepped away from the cameras, the crowd's chants echoed behind her. The fight wasn't over, but in this moment, justice had won, and the world was watching. Asha's brave stand against injustice wasn't just about winning a case. It was about proving that truth, courage, and unity can make a difference. Moments like these remind us that even the smallest steps toward fairness can lead to big changes. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone stood up for what's right? Or maybe you've experienced an act of kindness or courage that inspired you. Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how justice, resilience, or hope has touched your life. If this story moved you, share it with your friends. Let's inspire more people to believe in the power of standing up for others. And if you want more stories like this, stories about bravery, truth, and change, don't forget to subscribe and follow us. Together, we can create a world where justice shines brighter every day. So, what's your story? Let us know where you're watching from and join the conversation.